Well, guys, can you believe it? We're on session 21 in our journey in authentic manhood. 21 sessions we've been together, and we have covered an immense volume of material. We started out, if you remember, by covering the history of manhood. Then we talked about our past. We talked about why we've become who we've become because of our family of origin. We talked about wounds that we suffered. We talked about friendships, vision. We had a session on the theology of manhood where we probed around in the beginnings of the Scripture, the book of Genesis. We formulated a few weeks ago a solid biblical definition of manhood. And in the last few weeks, we've been covering men and women in general and marriage in particular. And so I just want you to know that we're on the home stretch. One thing I want you to do right here at the beginning, though, is don't forget your manhood plan. Everybody remember that, your manhood plan? You don't need to forget that, especially because of the importance of graduation in relationship to it. So it's very, very vital that you do that. The first part, remember, looking back, you should have completed. The second part of the manhood plan, which is looking at now, should have been completed. And in these last few weeks, looking forward, should be in process. Everybody clear about that? We've said it all year. That's the one thing that we're going to ask you to do. Very important that you finish that manhood plan. Now, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about marriage, and we want to continue that and finish that today. And I want to give you a very fundamental principle that we've learned the whole time. I hope you have this embedded in your mind, and that is marriage at the core. Okay, jot this down. Marriage at the core is two equals with different functions. We put up a diagram about marriage, didn't we? And in that marriage diagram, we talked about the husband and the wife and the roles they play. And I talked about that these were core roles and that they had core responses to one another, husband and wife, in relationship to those roles. And I just want to again mention to you, and everybody listen very carefully, when I spoke about the word core, it's so important that you hear this. When the Scriptures outline the role of a man and woman in marriage, they're speaking to that small but essential ingredient that the husband and the wife bring together in that relationship. That's what it's focused on. Marriage at the core, the intimacy of a man and woman at the core. And for all of us, that core role responsibility is the same. What is wrapped around that core as a husband and wife for their individual lives and for their marriage in particular can be vastly different than anybody else's in the careers they pursue, in the interests they have, in the things that they invest themselves in. And all that is an elective of life, and that's part of the wonder of life. But at the core, there's sameness for a man and a woman. And those core responsibilities and those core roles and those core roles that they have towards one another are absolutely essential to the success of the marriage because they fit the man and the woman into a complementary relationship that brings success. So hear me when I say core versus comprehensive. For the wife, her core role is summarized in that title helper. Remember that? The title helper. She serves the marriage, and she's a servant of the marriage. She serves the marriage by assuming a nurturing role of care and support. That's vital for the relationship, and it's vital for the husband-wife interaction, and it's vital when children come along, and it's vital for launching a healthy next generation. That's how she serves at the core. The man's core role is summarized in the word head, and he's also a servant, and his role is to serve the marriage by assuming a leadership role of courage and responsibility, because guys, that's what it's going to take to accomplish the kind of responsibilities you've been given. It's going to take a lot of courage. So those are their two essential core roles where they complement one another over a lifetime. Now, we also learned last week as we were finishing up that a man who's skilled in the art of woman also knows how to meet the vital needs of his wife. And I gave you what I think are the four top needs a woman has not only in a dating relationship, but especially in a marriage relationship. Remember what they were? First one was this, companionship. She needs a friend that she can drink deeply with in relationship, because women are strong relational creatures. She needs security. She needs to know that she's safe in her relationship with her husband. And especially when that comes to finances, and we talked a lot about that last week. She needs significance. She needs to know that she's valued, and that's why the response of praise and honor in that relationship from her husband to his wife is so important, because the woman in all the small things of the home and family needs to know how essential those are, and then she also needs emotional responsiveness. Women need emotional expressions. They need you to take the time to listen to them, express their world to you. They need to hear emotional expressions, especially the phrase, remember, I love you. And I hope that this last week you grabbed your wife, looked in her eyes and said, honey, I just want you to know, I love you. That's so vitally important to a relationship, these needs that a wife has that the husband says, I'm skilled at meeting those needs. Now, I could say a lot more about that. I've written a book, Rocking the Roles, Building a Win-Win Marriage. And especially for you younger guys just starting out in the marriage relationship, or you guys in maybe a serious dating relationship, can I recommend this to you and your fiance, or you and your wife as you're starting out? This will take you light years down the road. This fleshes out in much greater detail the things that we've been talking about the last 3 weeks. Rocking the Roles, Building a Win-Win Marriage. Now, saying all that, if we were to reduce all of this down just to a term and defining the man, his relationship to a woman, how he does it, we'd pull it down to just one term, a term that I've defined for you. I'd call the head, or the husband, the servant leader. There it is, servant leader. It's a noble title, guys. And for those men who will assume that title, it creates a noble adventure. But I want to be honest with you, it's an adventure that's both thrilling and terrifying all at the same time. It's a lot like flying a jet plane or being in a jet fighter plane. How many of you guys, if you had the opportunity to fly in a jet fighter today, would do it? Let me just see. Okay. Well, let me just read you the account of a guy who did that. His name's Rick Riley. And he had the opportunity to fly in a plane, and he tells us what it was like, because this is a lot like assuming the role servant leader. He says this, the U.S. Navy invited me to fly one of its F-14 Tomcats. I was thrilled. I was pumped. I was also toast. I should have known that when they told me my pilot would be Chip Biff King of Fighter Squadron 213, whatever you think he looks like, triple it. He's about 6 feet, tan, ice blue eyes, wavy surfer hair, finger crippling grip, the kind of guy who gargles nails. Biff's father, Jack King, was for years the voice of NASA's mission control. Biff was to fly me in that F-14 Tomcat, a ridiculously powerful $60 million weapon with nearly as much thrust as weight, not unlike golfer John Daly. I was worried about getting airsick, so the night before the flight, I asked Biff if there was something I should eat the next morning. Bananas, he said. For the potassium, I asked. No, Biff said, because they taste about the same coming up as they do going down. The next morning out on the tarmac, I had on my flight suit with my name sewn on the left breast. No call sign like Crash or Leadfoot, but still very cool. I carried my helmet in the crook of my arm as Biff had instructed. A fighter pilot named Psycho gave me a safety briefing and then fastened me into my ejection seat, which, when employed, would, quote, egress me out of the plane at such a velocity that I would immediately be knocked unconscious from the G-forces. Just as I was thinking about aborting this flight, the canopy closed over me, and Biff gave the ground crew a thumbs up. In minutes, we were firing nose up at 600 miles per hour. We leveled out and then canopy rolled over another F-14. Those 20 minutes were the rush of my life. Unfortunately, the flight lasted 80 minutes. It was like being on a roller coaster at Six Flags, only without rails. We did barrel rolls, snap rolls, loops, yanks, and banks. We dived, rose high, and dived again, sometimes with a vertical velocity of 10,000 feet per whatever. We chased another F-14, and it chased us. We broke the speed of sound. Sea was sky, and sky was sea. Biff was absolutely cool, with a cast iron stomach and Freon nerves. Flying at 200 feet, we did a 90-degree turn at 550 miles per hour, creating a G-force of 6.5 times my body weight. And immediately, I egressed the bananas. I also egressed the pizza from the night before and the lunch before that. In fact, I egressed a box of Milk Duds from the 6th grade. I made Linda Blair from the movie The Exorcist look polite. Because of the G's, I was egressing stuff that did not even want to be egressed. I went through not one air sick bag, but two. Biff said I passed out twice. I was coated in sweat at one point as we were coming in upside down in a bank curve on a mock bombing target, and the G's were flattening me like a tortilla, and I was in and out of consciousness. I realized that I was the first person in history to throw down. A week later, when the spinning finally stopped, Biff called. He said he and the fighter pilots had the perfect call sign now for me. Said he had sent it on a patch for my flight suit. What is it, I asked. 2 bags, he said. Well, you know what? When you begin to think of servant leaders, you look at that term up there on the screen, it sounds great on the ground. But when you take it into the air, it has a whole different feeling altogether. In fact, I want you to know, guys, the term servant leader in flight can be overwhelming. So I want to warn you, I'm going to move through today fairly quickly 25 ways to be a servant leader. But as we move through this, some of you are going to lose your bananas. Some of you are going to go unconscious. Some of you are going to feel like the whole world's spinning upside down because this will feel so overwhelming. So I have a word for you right at the beginning before we start moving through this list, this detailed list of practically applying servant leadership in real flight. Here's the word I want you to know. What I'm about to give you is an outline for life, an outline for a lifetime, not a to-do list for this week. Everybody get that? This is not a to-do list for this week, so don't get overwhelmed. This is an outline for a lifetime, so you need to relax. Nevertheless, I'm going to take you up for a little test flight run, okay? We're going to get in the canopy, fire up the engines, and take off. I want to give you 25 ways to be a servant leader, practically, in the real day-to-day of life. Here's the first one. A servant leader includes his wife in envisioning the future. It's so important that you men know where you're going in your relationship with your wife. You're not just living in the panic of the day-to-day. So many guys live their married life just reacting to what's right in front of them. But if you are a servant leader, you're taking this marriage relationship and the children that flow from it somewhere. And here's the question: to where? It's your responsibility as a man to work with your wife in formulating a future that both of you are excited about sacrificing for and living for. Now, what that's going to mean is in the day-to-day of life, you're going to periodically have to pull out and get away and sit down and look at each other in the eye and start asking some questions like, where do we want to go in this relationship? What do we want our kids to look like? What are the things that we want to do in this marriage, to have in this marriage, to enjoy in this marriage? That requires getting away and talking about it, because the one thing that you want is not just to talk about it, but to agree upon it together so you can fight for it when you get back home. One of the best little tools that I've ever seen is the one that one of our pastors here, Bill Wellens, wrote, Getting Away to Get It Together. And I'm just going to recommend it to you. It's just a real simple outline of how to have a 2 or 3 day getaway where you sit down and just lists questions and gives some things to talk about where you begin to shape your future together as a husband and wife. But envisioning the future of taking your relationship somewhere, let me tell you something, guys. That's your responsibility. That's part of flying lead in the marriage. But a servant leader will envision the future for his wife and help work with her to agree together on where they're going. Secondly, a servant leader accepts spiritual responsibility for the family. Did you know if 100 individual kids came to this church, over time, about 20 families would follow? Sometimes I'll talk to a couple and they'll say, yeah, our son or daughter came to the church and they got so excited about it, we finally came. But they did a survey and found out if 100 kids, individual kids come to a church, about 20 to 25 families come later. If 100 wives individually came to this church, about 20 families would follow. If 100 husbands individually came to this church, the survey discovered 97 families would follow. Guys, you are the pace setter for your family spiritually. Every once in a while, I'll have an individual talk to me, a man will be talking, and say, you know, my wife, she's the spiritual one of the family. And I have to hold myself back at that point because what I really want to do is just lean forward across the table and go, why? Why? Do you think that absolved you from that? See, it's your role as a man to be in tandem with your wife. You're the one who should be talking about the importance of church and how often we attend. You should be one of the ones who has the courage to initiate spiritual discussions. You should be the one who is growing deep enough in God's Word that when it comes to major decisions and issues in life, you can bring spiritual perspective into that decision making. That's your responsibility. It's so important that you accept that responsibility. That's a courageous thing to do. But it's so important that you do it because a servant leader accepts spiritual responsibility for his family. Third, a spiritual leader is one who's willing to say, I'm sorry, and forgive me to his family. I learned this kind of in a hard-edged way when one of my daughters was 10 years old, Rebecca, and I had had a miserable week, and life just seemed to be getting harder and harder. Now, I'm the pastor of the church, and I was in there thinking I was in a room all by myself, and I was so mad. I had my briefcase, and I threw it down and went, damn it! And then I looked up, and there's my 10-year-old daughter with her pastor father saying, damn it. What do you do in a moment like that? Because there'll be moments of humiliation just like that for every leader. What you do is you go like I did that day, by God's grace, and you just get down on your knees and look them right in the eye and say, would you forgive me? And you know what they do? They forgive you. And you can move on. The same discussion I had with a group of dads not long ago who are all divorced. Their kids are all over the country. Some of them see them just on weekends. They were talking and asking me, what do you do? And when you get together, what do you say? You know, it's so easy to get together and, you know, mom's now at a distance and, you know, it's real easy to want to get into a conversation to justify where you are and what you're doing and why, you know, you are the way you are. And I just tell the guys, listen, you know what the best thing you can do for your child if you're separated like that? Is at some point when it's appropriate, regardless of who was at fault and who said what and how all that came about, you just need to look them in the eye and say, I am so sorry we got divorced. Would you forgive me? That's what they need to hear. And a person who is pursuing servant leadership will use the terms frequently, "I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?" Number 4, a servant leader discusses household responsibilities with his wife and makes sure they're fairly distributed. A good question, I think, for a servant leader to ask is, after 5 p.m., is the workload fair? Because it's real easy for a guy to think that when he comes home, the day is over. No, is the workload fair? That's the question he needs to be asking. And over time, there's going to be the need from time to time to reassess who does what around the home, especially when kids come along. And when the kids get old enough, it's good for them to take charge of their responsibility to the home as well. 5th, a servant leader seeks the consultation of his wife on all major financial responsibilities. Don't surprise your wife with that new car without her knowing about it. And worse, don't surprise her with the new bass boat. She needs to be included. A wife needs to be included, even if she is not inclined towards money and thinks you're just going to take care of it. Don't let her excuse herself from the financial decisions. She needs to be a part of all major financial decisions, all major financial investments, all financial decisions about giving, about budgeting. She needs to be educated in it and part of that and in tandem with you on that. It really would be good and excellent for every couple to have established some, what I think are some sound biblical financial principles as well. So when they are making those decisions, they have some common ground on which to have that particular discussion. But a servant leader will always include his wife on all major financial decisions. 6th, a servant leader will follow through with commitments he has made to his wife. His word to his wife is extremely important. He wants it to be golden because it inspires in her the key word for an intimate relationship, which is trust. And trust is the super glue of any relationship. 7th, a servant leader anticipates the different seasons of his marriage. He understands that marriage is going to change from season to season, so he anticipates the different seasons his marriage will pass through. I hope you know that every marriage is, in fact, a series of little marriages. Did you know that? That are butted up against one another. One psychologist said that a long-term marriage is really serial monogamy. And I want you to know, in the first marriage of my marriage, which was marriage without children, I did really good. We traveled, we had fun. But when I got married the second time in that marriage, when children came along, I didn't do too good. Especially when the second child came along. That was the lowest point in our married life. And part of the reason for that is because I was still operating on principles from the previous season, thinking that the house should be clean and my wife should be sexy and available to me, even though she was spending most of her day running around with a rug rat during the day and up with a newborn at night. And I wanted that and everything else. And it doesn't work. And I was out of perspective. And I was almost out of the house. And now here I am at 53 years old. I've got 2 years before we're empty nesters. And when that last child leaves for college, we're going to enter into another marriage. It's called married without children. And how well we anticipate all that's involved there, because that's going to change our relationship. It's especially going to change my wife's relationship when she doesn't have breakfast to cook for children and things to clean up and places to go with them. It's going to require adjustments. Every marriage is a series of marriages. And a good servant leader will anticipate the next season coming up and the changes that need to be made in order to make that next season as effective, hopefully, and as successful as the previous one. 8, a servant leader anticipates the different stages his children will pass through. And his leadership must adjust to those stages. Did you know when your kids are young, basically your face towards them as a dad is that of a coach. Sometimes a strong coach, a coach who's saying, do this, don't do that, giving directions and barking out orders and stuff like that. When they become teenagers, you can't be a coach anymore. You've got to change to being more of a counselor, one who's there to listen, to empathize, to be a part of all the emotion that's going through those years, and to offer advice in ways that they can receive it. If you try to be a coach with a teenager, you're going to lose. And then when they get in their college years and their opening years out in the work world, you move more to a consultant role. You're not even a counselor anymore. Consultant is somebody who is invited in, doesn't butt in, gets invited in to give information, right? And that's your new face for a season. And hopefully if you navigate that well as they move into married life, then you move from a consultant to a colleague, a trusted friend. But a servant leader looks at his children and he understands that there's a real skill involved in interacting with the children that have been entrusted under me. Ninth, a servant leader frequently tells his wife what he likes about her. That's one of those small but what I call high-octane skills that a true servant leader possesses that elevates his game. I love basketball, and one of the moves that I love in basketball most, there's only a few players who do it really well. Magic Johnson was probably one of the best, is the no-look pass. You guys, don't you love a no-look pass? A guy driving into the lane and just dishing it unexpected to a guy right there into the goal where he can score. You know what the no-look pass is for a servant leader? It's when out of the blue he turns to his wife. Just out of the blue. They might be walking in the mall, or she may be there washing the dishes, and he just comes and puts his arm around her and says, you know what I really like about you? And then he tells her. Now let me tell you, that's the no-look pass of marriage. And a husband, a wise husband, is one who possesses that finesse in relationship to the woman he loves, and that just gives life to her soul. 10th, a servant leader provides financially for his family's basic living expenses. We talked a lot about that last week, so I'm not going to cover that